But before going to the classical heritage, I'd like us to concentrate a little bit more on other possible deviations that allow black to complicate the game or to make it more lively. So after knight c3, black could play c6, and that's normally leads after e3, knight f6, knight f3, knight bd7, leads to the position known as Meran system. Was also introduced by Akiba Rubinstein, one of the greatest minds in the opening theory in the first quarter of the 20th century. And it's the opening on its own, and analyzing it and looking at all the options of the opening, which is one of the most popular today, and it's developed in many directions, and very often talking about improvements of move 20 or 25. It's also another subject for our review today. White could play bishop d3, or white could play queen c2, and there are so many openings, and I promise that eventually we'll investigate it as a separate, in a separate edition, celebrating Meran as one of the most aggressive and most exciting and intriguing modern openings. What is important to remember that certain positions could occur with different moves order, and this is a typical sign of the modern theory, that some positions that we are analyzing, they could be classified as something from a different opening, but eventually we should look at the positions that are arising in the middle of the game, or in fact at move 10, 12, and just combine them under one roof. So eventually after knight c3, black could play knight f6, white could play knight f3, and then we could play black could play c6, and then after e3, as you could see, knight bd7, we're back to the classical Meran. Of course, after c6, white could elect playing bishop g5, and then black has another choice, either to go to extra sharp, one of the sharpest lines in the modern openings called Botvinnik variation, dc4, e4, b5, e5, h6, bishop h4, g5, knight takes g5, h5, bishop g5, knight bd7, and you could see that the position is already off the balance. And even despite 60 years of being analyzed and also being tested by leading players for the last nearly 25 years, this opening couldn't guarantee a quiet and easy life, even for those who studied it very deeply. So far, there is no ultimate conclusion, and it gives a unique opportunity, even for the greatest players and for amateurs, of course with the help of the computer, to look for some improvements and practice this line with both colors. But then again, what is important to remember, nearly at every crossroad in the openings, you always have a choice. You can go for a very sharp line, as here, for instance, you go to Botvinnik line, or you can choose knight bd7, which is after e3, queen a5 leads to so-called Cambridge Springs defense or counterattack. I played it several times, and here white, in its turn, has a choice of either going for a quiet line, knight d2, protecting e4 square, because black's idea is to move the knight on e4, using the pin on the a5 e1 diagonal, and after knight d2. Bishop b4, queen c2. That's another classical position. I could ask you to look at several games played in the famous match Alekhine Capablanca, where Alekhine took on c4 and played position with two bishops, but a little bit pressed by white, and he eventually succeeded in defending it. but eventually black was looking for some more aggressive options, and after queen c2 now ended up in playing castle. So you can look at several games that I played even recently, and again there is no ultimate conclusion, but it seems to me that black could hold. But white could go for very aggressive line, c takes d5, which I also played with white against Smyslov in my final candidate match in '84. And after knight takes d5, queen d2, we are also entering a very, very complicated position. So it's just a general review. I'm not going to give any recommendations. I'm just telling you that all these lines, despite they're very old, some say even antiquated, they always offer great opportunities for looking for improvements. Black could play here bishop b4, black could play here knight 7 b6, and all of these lines are still, hiding a lot of possibilities for improvements, a lot of options for both black and white to deviate from main lines, finding some new, fresh ideas. And instead of going with classical knight bd7 here, or ultra sharp Botvinnik's dc4, black could play h6. And here again, it's a crossroad for white, either to go for a so-called Moscow variation, taking on f6, queen f6, and now black has two bishops, but white has opportunity to play eventually e4 and controlling the center, having more space. Here white played queen c2, queen b3, e3, g3, so there are many options, even a3. And with all these options, white never succeeded in breaking black's defense. There are many games played, and still up to the quality of your play. If you know how to play well with two bishops in a position with little space, you could be on the safe side. If you prefer more space and initiative, but considering that you're giving up two bishops, long-term advantage for opposition side, you could prefer white. I could also give recommendations to look at certain games. For instance, Alexei Dreyev is one of the greatest experts of this position, playing it with black, and he always succeeded in defending it. So sometimes white prefers to move the bishop on h4, but after dc4, e4, g5, bishop g3, and b5, now, unlike in Botvinnik's variation, white has to play without a pawn. And it's also a very entertaining line. I played this line more than 20 years ago against Mikhail Tal in Moscow Intrazono, but eventually it was promoted by players like Kalifman and later by Vladimir Kramnik, who succeeded in just producing new lines and new ideas for white. But again, we're entering unknown territory. There is no ultimate recipe for success. There is no recommendation that could give you a good initiative with white or a solid game with black. It's entirely up to you to analyze this massive information and coming up with your own conclusion. And computer, of course, will be of a great help. So we could look at all these different deviations. We could look at different moves order that lead at complicated positions. And before we eventually moving, as I was promised, to the classical King's Gambit, I should mention one more, which is after move knight f3, black could play bishop b4. And now it's a new type of the positions that could be classified within the two systems, so-called Rogozin defense after bishop g5, or queen a4 check, for instance, knight c6, and then white could play e3 or bishop d2, or cd5, ed5, bishop g5, and then here black could either play h6, bishop h4, g5, or to play knight bd7, which is a traditional line called Westphal's variation. And again, we are witnessing the same problem. There are many games played. There are plenty of analysis are available in the books or on CDs on the net, but there's no final conclusion. There's still many strong players employing these lines with black, and white is trying to crack their defense. but it's always double-edged. So if you want to play d4, d5, but you don't want to go the classical King's Gambit, which is the most solid defense, you have plenty of options, from Meran to Westphalian Rogozin defense. Not talking about Slav, of course, and Queen's Gambit accepted, where you could look for more complications. You could look for very entertaining game that could give you chances to take initiative. But all these positions will be characterized with us, with black, having pawn on d5. But now it's enough about general history, enough about deviations. Now it's definitely time to go back to the classical Queen's Gambit, and again, as was said, the openings for the World Championship matches.